Hello, thank you for tuning in to listen to me speak about my photographic series focused on King's College Chapel. It all started with a previous photographic series that I was doing called Illuminating Cambridge Libraries, wherein I photographed one library from each of the 31 colleges at the University of Cambridge. As I was doing this, the natural questions arose where older libraries had been. For example, here at King's College, the library was built in the Victorian times. I was curious where the library had been in 1441 when the college opened. And indeed, it was in the now vestries, the side rooms of the chapel. I was given access to go in and photograph these side rooms in the chapel and some of the remaining bookcases that have been standing there since the early 1600s. Some of the other bookcases, however, had been dismantled, and some parts had been turned into supports for the choir stalls in the main part of the chapel. These I was allowed to go into the main part of the chapel and photograph as well as part of the library series. This then was the main catalyst, the reason for this focused series that I did, wherein after the library photography, the Dean of Chapel invited me to do a further photographic series on the chapel. I was very excited at this and of course jumped at the possibility. As I started photographing in the chapel, I realized how I operate when I take photos is I first really need to get to know a space very well, very cleanly, very clearly. And for me to do that is I go and I take quite traditional photos, sort of expected traditional photos, trying to see how I respond to the space, how the space responds to me and my camera, and what I can pull out, and trying to make the space a little bit my own. Trying to pull out some of the architectural details. This is what I love to do, pulling out all of these details in the stonework and some of the paint decoration details around the chapel itself. But ultimately what happens for me in order to really find my creativity in terms of a fine art project is I really need to be bored. And it's a funny thing to be bored when photographing King's College Chapel, but to me, that's where I find my creativity, because when I've been somewhere and I feel that I know it, then I'm able to go around and find interesting and unique angles that I wouldn't have otherwise noticed when I first walk into a place. So I certainly don't win any awards for speed in my photography. The whole series took me about 2 years. I get to find little corners of curiosity. And I walk along, for example, and see what happens when I stick my camera lens down the barrel of one of the organ pipes. Now, this organ pipe itself spans approximately 10 meters distance from the north side to the south side of the chapel, across the short axis of the chapel, but all the way across. And to get this one, I had to balance my tripod on the different stairs leading up into the organ loft itself, and it was all very precarious, standing on my tiptoes. I'm rather short myself, so I have to fully extend all the way up on my tiptoes and reaching my arm all the way up. And I love this photo. It's one of my favorite photos. As a result of it, I think it's a really very unique, interesting, minimalist perspective on something that's so classic and makes such a beautiful sound as well. And when I sit down and I take a rest, and I sit back in the stalls taking a rest, and I look around to see what I can see, and I end up seeing these beautiful vistas of just a book placed there waiting to be read. And this panel on the right here is a very large panel that flanks a fairly sizable portrait by Rubens that's in the altar of the chapel. And when you just glance at these side panels, they're not much to look at. Maybe they just look like solid black and kind of flanking either side of the portrait to make the painting stand out a little bit more and have a little bit more presence. But when you look closely in detail, and of course have some of the stained glass light bouncing off it, it's actually quite textured and really very colorful. Part of the series, I got to go many different places in the chapel. I had quite a bit of access. The spire, you can see, I was up in the spires. This is the northwest corner spire, and just looking straight up and wondering about those beams. How long have they been there? They don't look like they're that old, actually. Meandering along on the roof space and along the roof space corridor here on the right, and trying to mimic some of the play on windows from the roof space corridor there. Another major opportunity from the series was that I was able to have a ride in a cherry picker, twice actually. And thank you very much again to Colin, the cherry picker, who put up with me and my little fear of heights. But it was a really amazing opportunity. You can see in this photo, we were above the cross of the H transept of the windows. We were roughly 20 meters high in the air. And it's quite a feat for me, especially being quite afraid of heights. But these were some of the photos that came out of it. And I was really thrilled at the opportunity and the amount of, and the amount of color that I had to play with, the amount of light, and just the incredible variety of what the chapel looks like from high on up when you're actually at the same height as the windows. It's a completely different experience. And here I'm going to zoom in now, as I already did, with King David, and then again on some of these pipe mouths here. And you can see the incredible detail and texture that's picking out there. As I was moving around in the cherry picker, we got to play with some fun angles and some different ways to line up the various features in the chapel. And so here you can see the angle played masking the window even a little bit. And these ones here are, we turned around in the cherry picker looking the other way. This is towards the west end of the entrance. You can see the exit there. People are getting ready to leave, just a few people. And the second time we were up in the chapel, we were the cherry picker was located over here, right at the door of the west end. And so I was able to get a shot looking all the way down the barrel of the chapel, which is 88 meters long. It's really quite something. And the builder walked past just as we were kind of hanging out in the cherry picker, really just waiting for the sun to shine, which it never really did. I was hoping it would come blazing through that window, but it never did that morning. It was dratted English weather. But I was thrilled the builder walked down the aisle. I was quite pleased for that. So to move on, just a little bit about equipment, and then I'll let you move on with your day. I have a Nikon D750. I love my Nikon, and I have some rather heavy glass that goes along with it. Most of the photos were taken with the long lens, actually, the 7200 Tamron. And some of these close-ups here, for example, this one of the keyhole. This is the key to the lock to go up into the organ loft, actually. And some were taken with a 50mm, but I have I use Capture One Pro, quite a fan of it. And when I don't want to, have all the weight around my neck, I take out this little Sony that I have. It's really a lovely little camera. But what happened was there was a particular photo I wanted to take a side view of the chapel, and I knew that I could take the photo, but that my camera actually couldn't do it. It could do everything, but not this one. And so I asked nicely, very nicely, and I was able to borrow a Hasselblad. They loaned me a Hasselblad, the field kit, the X1D Mark II field kit for about 2 weeks, and it was in January or February of this year, just before lockdown, really. And I was able to get this photograph here, which is a side-on view. So you're looking at about 20 or 25 meters height there, and you can see just the tiny door, which is actually a rather large door. There's no person for scale in the photo. So also, while I had the Hasselblad, I also had the great opportunity to photograph, not during the service, but during the setup for Candlemas, where they light all the candles, or they light all the candles for the service. And you can see here, half of the candles are lit, and this is actually in preparation for the choir to come in for their rehearsal. And this was what I call my practice shot. So they light half the candles, and then the choir comes in. They rehearse for about an hour. And towards the tail end of their rehearsal, the vergers come in and they light the rest of these candles. And at which point the choir leaves, and then the public enters straight away after. And then the choir does a nice procession once the public is seated. But what happened was that the vergers agreed to hold back the public for me for 1 minute so that I could take a photo in between the choir leaving and the public coming in for the photograph. And this was the photo that resulted from that. I'm really quite pleased. I had been sitting since taking the practice photo. I then sat and listened to the choir rehearsal, which was a special treat for me, such a delight. And then I was able to take this photo, and I had to kind of set the exposure while I was sitting there waiting silently while the choir was rehearsing. because of course the light was changing so rapidly, and I only had 1 minute. I wouldn't have time to play around with setting exposures. So I got to do the same again a second night, pointing the other direction. So looking at the east end. And here again, I'll just point out, you can see those black panels on the side of the painting. They look rather small here, but they're not. So here we are. There's the practice shot, which I quite like. I love the evening light, and at night, the entire space just really shines. The entire space and the candles really shine. And it was a very special experience for me to be there. Also, because I had such a short amount of time, I hadn't realized that the conductor's stand would be here blazing in full light. So I find it a funny little aside to the otherwise perfectly exposed photograph. So at any rate, if you would like to hear more about it or more about my work, you can visit my website. You can buy the book that's just now coming out. It's now available for pre-order. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a nice day.